Hey everyone, I'm Mao, and welcome to the Game Design Perspective. So, if you watched last week's video, you remember that we talked about the situation at Square Enix and some of the IPs that Square Enix owns, mainly Final Fantasy. But this video is all about Final Fantasy. What's it coming for Final Fantasy in the future? What can Square Enix do to place Final Fantasy in a better position? Things are very rough at the moment for Final Fantasy. It is a successful franchise, but it's not as successful as Square Enix wants it to be. And all of this is a mistake. Square Enix is trying hard to fix the mistake that was 10 years in the making. From 2006 to 2016, which is when Final Fantasy XII and Final Fantasy XV were released, Final Fantasy, and I'm sorry to say it, became irrelevant. Final Fantasy lost its popularity. Final Fantasy XIII, either you like it or not, it is not a popular title. A lot of people don't like Final Fantasy XIII. And even with how little people liked it or how not popular it was, Square Enix was trying really hard to get us into Final Fantasy XIII. Even with how little people cared about Final Fantasy XIII, Square Enix not only made one title, not only did they make two, no, they made three titles. They turned Final Fantasy XIII into a trilogy. And Square Enix loved Lightning so much that I don't know if you guys remember when they turned Lightning into a Louis Vuitton model and a Prada model. And I mean, it's not that I dislike the idea. Actually, I kind of really like the idea that they turned Lightning into a model. I wish they did that with more Final Fantasy characters, honestly. A Cloud would be a great example, right? But it's not that idea. It's the idea that Final Fantasy XIII was not popular and Square Enix was trying hard to get us into liking Final Fantasy XIII. And instead of making a new Final Fantasy title, they focused all of their resources into this trilogy. And not only that, then Square Enix released Final Fantasy XIV 1.0. I think we all know what happened to that MMORPG. It was a mess. It was a mess. So then you have two mainline Final Fantasy titles that were a mess, and both of them took the span of an entire console generation. And now I think it's really cool that they turned the lore for the Final Fantasy XIV 2.0, which is A Realm Reborn. I really love the idea of them pretty much crafting the rework for the game into the lore. It was amazing. And yes, they did a fantastic job bringing Final Fantasy XIV back to life. Actually, I believe it is one of the game industry's greatest achievements. It is fantastic how they redid it, fixed it, and brought it back to life to make it one of the most popular games ever. But let's also not forget about one other thing. What happened with Final Fantasy Versus 13? And I'm not gonna be talking about, oh yeah, Versus 13 was a different project than 15 and blah blah blah. I'm not gonna be talking about that. I'm gonna be talking about the fact that they showed a concept teaser on 2006. They hyped everyone up. It looked amazing, and for 10 years, the game only showed some gameplay and some trailers. The way they were showing snippets of the game just showed a game that was in trouble, that was in development hell. And that's gonna tie, whenever we talk about Final Fantasy 15, this is gonna tie into it. I was 11 years old when they showed the trailer, and I was hyped. And then I was 21 when they released Final Fantasy 15. Here's part of the issue with Final Fantasy today. My entire generation was not exposed to Final Fantasy by Square Enix during our teenage years. And in all honesty, I wouldn't be a massive Final Fantasy fan if it were not for a few reasons. For example, my brother Santi, you know him, the other host of the channel. He's older than me, and he introduced me to Final Fantasy when I was little. We used to play Crystal Chronicles a lot on the GameCube. I used to watch him play Final Fantasy VII, and since I had always been a huge handheld fan, I branched into the DS and PSP titles. Final Fantasy III on the DS was actually the first Final Fantasy that I truly played and I completed. I finished it from beginning to end, as hard as it was on the DS, and I was I don't know, 11 or 12. And then I also played the Crystal Chronicles series on the DS, the Four Heroes of Light, Final Fantasy IV. Then I went into the PSP and played Dissidia and Duodecim, which are fantastic games. I actually still play them nowadays very often. And I also played Crisis Core. Those were the Final Fantasies that were actually doing it for me. Those Final Fantasies were my actual introduction into the series. I did play 13 when it came out, I did finish it, but I didn't fall in love with it as much as I did with Final Fantasy 3. While Kingdom Hearts, on the other side, like, it's a different story because I got into it when it originally released, completely separate to Final Fantasy, but it might have something to do with how much I love Final Fantasy nowadays. Those handheld Final Fantasy games were not the ones that should have kept the brand alive. They were great. They were not responsible for that. They were not responsible into making the brand reach new heights, into truly getting more players into the fan base. They were not breaking the game news. And nowadays, I've played every numbered Final Fantasy and a lot of spin-offs and ports and remasters because I just can't get enough. Okay, and those are 10 years. What happens after Final Fantasy 15 released? Well, I got to know some new Final Fantasy fans thanks to the A Final Fantasy for Fans and First Timers marketing campaign. It was a really good marketing campaign. They only really got an older demographic into Final Fantasy. The generations that were teenagers when Final Fantasy 15 released, they were already playing games like Fortnite. And that generation is so much into live service games. Of course, I'm not gonna say that, oh no, every single teenager. I don't want to say like every single teenager, but as a general rule, like that generation is drawn into live service games. They love Fortnite, they love Call of Duty, PUBG. I'm not saying that as a wrong thing. It's just what they were exposed to their teenage years. So Final Fantasy 15 didn't really grow the fan base. Just a little bit, but not where it was supposed to be. And now Final Fantasy is paying for that lack of exposure to younger generations. Square Enix needs to get those younger generations to grow the brand, and they've been trying to. That's the whole reason why Final Fantasy 16 was not an RPG, it was an action game. That's the reason why Final Fantasy 16 had a story that was influenced by Game of Thrones. That's the reason why the game was written in English instead of Japanese. And in all honesty, like, it is a phenomenal game. I really adore Final Fantasy 16. It is fantastic, but today I'm just trying to be critical and just give my educated opinion on what the deal is going on with Square Enix and Final Fantasy. Not about me either saying I love Final Fantasy 16 or not. It's just like my objective view. And I think the true issue behind Final Fantasy 16 is that it was a numbered title, and people expect something different from a mainline title. If Final Fantasy 16 had been a spin-off, a lot of the complaints out there wouldn't probably exist because the game is really good. But I think that the game that exposes the issue better of what's happening with Final Fantasy is Stranger of Paradise Final Fantasy Origin, and it is a shame. I really like this one as well. I played it for like 200 hours, but the marketing behind it is probably one of the worst marketing campaigns in gaming I've ever seen. No one was interested in the game by looking at it. Oh wow, but the memes, they were everywhere. Like, everyone was making memes from Stranger of Paradise, but no one really played it. They memed it to infinity and beyond. The art style was something that it shouldn't have been. They wanted to lean so much into Dark Souls and attract Western audiences into Final Fantasy that no one did. I've tried to get so many people into playing Stranger of Paradise with me because I really believe it is a good game, but I just can't get them over the marketing and art style barrier. Imagine if that game was called Final Fantasy Origin and it featured an art style that was completely inspired by Yoshitaka Amano's art. Again, everyone, graphics matter! Graphics matter! The wrapping is as important as the chocolate itself. We've said it before on the channel. And the Stranger of Paradise is proof of that. Wrapping is as important as the chocolate itself. And the wrapping here was just not cutting it. It didn't cut it. But now, please, Square Enix, I politely request a Jack Garland figure for my collection. I really adore the character, and I'm not kidding. Please, thank you. No, I really want a Jack Garland figurine, please. But that's the core of one of the issues. Square Enix is so invested into trying to make Final Fantasy for a Western audience that they're losing the Japanese and Western audiences altogether. The Japanese culture is so big around the world because it's Japanese. People nowadays are extremely invested into anime and Japanese culture, not because they were made for Western audiences, but because the anime aesthetic is gorgeous and it's being adopted by the entire world because everyone found out that Japanese pop culture is really attractive and is really interesting. I literally worked on a game that is based around this concept. RKGK is a game based around that, around how people outside of Japan absorb Japanese culture and merge it into our own. So Square Enix, please stop making Final Fantasy into something that it's not. Final Fantasy XIV, which is your most popular game nowadays, is pretty much a complete Final Fantasy. It is completely a Final Fantasy game. Everything around it screams Final Fantasy. And look at how it is performing. People like Final Fantasy because it looks, plays, and feels like Final Fantasy. So with all of that said, I think it's time that we ask ourselves a question. Should Final Fantasy still stick to the numbers for the mainline titles? Because I really think Square Enix needs to find a way to let people know that they are ditching the numbers but maintaining the quality of a mainline game. Numbers are alienating people. And I asked this question on the last video, and I'm gonna ask it again, Final Fantasy fans. How many times have you tried recommended a Final Fantasy game to someone who doesn't know Final Fantasy and they tell you, oh man, but I haven't played the prior installments. Oh man, but isn't it numbered? Like, aren't the other one like prequels or something? That happens all the time. And that in and on itself is a barrier of entry for new fans of the series. If Square Enix wants to get new fans into the IP, maybe it's time to consider ditching the numbers. Maybe it's time to remove that non-existent barrier of entry. The Legend of Zelda doesn't have any numbers. Only Zelda 2, but everyone knows the difference in quality and scope thanks to the marketing of each game. And now moving to the next important topic of the video. Final Fantasy needs to make games faster. The most important factor when considering a budget of a game are salaries. So the longer the development goes, the budget for the game starts increasing exponentially. So now let's talk about the development times for the new Final Fantasy games, right? Final Fantasy 16 must have started development in 2015 after they released Final Fantasy 14 Heavensward. Yes, this doesn't mean that the entire team was already in production there, but that means like the directors and leads were already there making and concepting the game. Usually at very early stages of development, the entire team is not there. This still leaves us with around 8 years of development. That's nuts! It's nuts! 8 years developing a game, it's nuts! And then you have Final Fantasy VII Remake. And we don't have an exact time on when it started, but it started development with CyberConnect 2, which were the ones who developed .hack and Fantastic series. And they were working on it. And then development shifted to Square Enix in like 2016, 2017. That doesn't mean that the Square Enix rebooted development. That doesn't mean that whatever CyberConnect 2 did was not used by Square Enix. What it probably meant is that the team didn't have the size and tools to actually make Final Fantasy VII Remake, and because of that, they probably failed some milestones. They didn't deliver what they promised or what Square Enix required for some milestones. Now, I cannot confirm this, it's just my educated opinion, but that's probably what happened. So I'm gonna be a little bit generous and give Final Fantasy VII Remake 4 years of development time. But then you have Rebirth, which strictly iterated over Remake, and it again took 4 years of development time. So now we have the question, will Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 3, which I'm sure is gonna be the name for the next part of the Remake trilogy, is hidden somewhere around .hack G. But now we raise the question, if it takes another 40 years, I still believe that's a lot. The most important thing that Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 3 has to achieve is make a faster development time, because a faster development time will validate the pipelines designed by the team for future projects. This will also dictate if the quality that Remake Part 3 is going to have is sustainable. They need to start making Final Fantasy games faster. And with that said, I definitely don't think that Square Enix should just move on from what the Remake trilogy did with its systems. So the way I see it, there are two ways that Square Enix should move on with Final Fantasy for Final Fantasy 17 or 18. Due to the amount of systems and pipeline implementation and fidelity to the series, I think they should should iterate over the Remake trilogy. Final Fantasy 16 is great and all. I adore it and pretty much have nothing really bad to say about it. But a lot of people have issues with it not feeling like a true Final Fantasy, which is fair. It's fair to think like that. It's fair to see where Final Fantasy 16 like somewhat failed for a lot of people. So I don't think they should, unless they do a spin-off series based on what Final Fantasy 16 did. I'm not saying that they should continue the story, but reuse maybe the combat for a spin-off series. But for the mainline titles, I think they should iterate over Remake. Either that, or they go the Baldur's Gate 3 way. Because I swear to you, like, Baldur's Gate 3 moved the carpet under everyone's feet at Square Enix. Like, that game proved that there's still a way and a place for turn-based games in AAA development. And I would love to see that. If it's not for the mainline Final Fantasy titles, then it's time for the Final Fantasy Tactics series to make a comeback, like Baldur's Gate 3. And maybe it is actually the right way to bring back life into the IP. So many of us, including myself, have been waiting for a new Final Fantasy Tactics. It's time! It's time! Strategy games are as popular as ever. They have never been more popular than nowadays. And where is Final Fantasy Tactics? We have Fire Emblem games succeeding because of Fire Emblem Awakening. We have Baldur's Gate 3, which won Game of the Year, succeeding. Where is Final Fantasy Tactics in all of this? Where is it? It's time. But that decision and whatever happens, I think depends completely on the Final Fantasy Remake trilogy's team. If the last part of the trilogy takes 4 years or more, what does that mean for Final Fantasy 17 and 18? Because even if they have the pipelines and validate the pipelines, they still need to reconcept and do a lot of work that has already been done for the Remake trilogy. Now, Final Fantasy 16 sold 3 million copies when it launched, and Square Enix was expecting way more from just those 3 millions. But then you have games like Dragon's Dogma 2, which is celebrating 3 million copies sold, and even raised salaries, and woo, and Capcom is having a party because of how many copies they sold. And Capcom is pretty much the size of the Square Enix. Dragon's Dogma is considered a play game. Why is Final Fantasy taking so long to make and cannot celebrate 3 million copies sold? But Dragon's Dogma 2 can. Capcom is raising salaries, it's paying executives more, and it's paying its investors more. Where is Final Fantasy in all of this? How is 3 million copies like too little of a number for Square Enix? Final Fantasy 7 Rebirth is huge. Only following the mainline story in Final Fantasy 7 Rebirth is around 46 hours. Completing the game is like 160 hours. Final Fantasy games used to be around 30 to 40 hours, just the mainline story, and completing them was around 80. Final Fantasy 16 nailed this. The 16 team nailed the length of the game, and Square Enix needs to focus on making a game the similar size. It is really hard to replay a game that is 100 hours long. Regardless of the amount of time it actually takes to develop a game, the next Final Fantasy games cannot be this large and this long. They have to be shorter experiences for all the players, because that also gives us some replay value whenever the new one is about to release. Oh well, we played the previous one. But a lot of people who played Rebirth now are probably not going to replay Rebirth when the next part of the Remake trilogy actually releases. They need to bring Final Fantasy back to its roots in its length and iterate on over Final Fantasy VII Remake. All right, but with that, I'm gonna leave you guys to it. It is a long video and it's a dense one. I really hope you liked it. I really hope that what I said made sense. And tell me, what are you expecting for Final Fantasy 17 or 18? Or are you expecting a Final Fantasy Tactics like I am? Please, guys, like, comment, and subscribe. And I'll see you guys on the next one. Thank you so much for watching. You guys are awesome. See you guys.